Well, it seems to me that, something else will change in this because the, the sort of a premise of the era of AI, of having tools like this, is that data will increasingly be agglomerated. And there will be bigger and bigger pools. The large language models will get larger and larger, and other components will be added to them. And in the legal profession, you get a benefit that's a little bit akin to the medical profession, which is if you have access to a database of all legal cases, if you have access to a database that covers, far-flung legal cases, then you can find correlations with what you're doing that might have been hard to find before. In medicine, the example people often will bring up is what they call orphan diseases, which are diseases where very few people get them. But if you have a really big enough database, then you can find 1,000 examples and you can find which treatments work and so forth. Presumably, there's a corollary for that in the law, is there not?
There is. I would say the real world complexities of acquiring all that data, consolidating that data, ranking it by relevance and importance, and then the applicability in your particular circumstances in your particular jurisdiction is still a very complicated task, and we are still some years from that being deployed in a particularly self-serve way that an ordinary, or I was going to say an ordinary non-lawyer or an ordinary lawyer who is not an expert in the particular field in which they're researching can place total reliance. And we are quite a long way from that, I would say. However, the speed at which we're getting advancement is astonishing. And one of the main barriers is that legal, like some other fields, has a few bodies, the Thomson Reuters, the Westlaws of the world, who control a lot of data. They don't really share that data. That's why normally you end up having multiple subscriptions to multiple services. And they will do strategic partnerships. Now, there may be consolidation, and it might make sense for a large player to acquire the other. But then you get into antitrust considerations and things of that nature. It is a really complicated picture, but the possibilities are great. And I do think that the people this benefits most, like the AI revolution as a whole within the legal practice, are the very large enterprises with the most volume of work that they need to get through and are stretched for resource, being told to do more with less, etc. And the very smallest practitioners, the people who have, again, very little resource, but may have a great deal of complexity or an unsurmountable volume of work that they need to get through. It allows them to be more competitive with mid-tier players. The people who are sort of stuck in the middle, those sort of mid-tier firms, mid-tier corporates, they're the ones who are sort of having to adopt AI essentially to compete with their peers, because otherwise they'll just drop down and become overly competed against by the smaller players. So it'll be interesting to see how the legal market shifts in the next few years. And actually, one thing I really predict is that a lot of smaller boutique firms, for example, will become more competitive and available to corporates as outside counsel because they are AI enabled.
Yeah. Now, I one of the things that seems to be a likely value added that people are seeking in these very advanced applications of a new technology is something old-fashioned like trust, because particularly when the stakes are very high, one of the reasons you go to the lawyer is not one you mentioned, but it's like not to fuck it up. It's like not to get this thing wrong, right? And to make sure, and to have a bunch of people double checking it and looking at semicolons. And AI in its early phases, whether it's doing research or it's writing, is known for slipping up periodically. And, for a company like yours, that must be a concern regarding liability. And for your clients, it must be a concern. We talk about hallucination, wrong word, but we talk about that. But, if you're saying what color dress did Taylor Swift wear at her Paris concert, and it comes back with the wrong color, who cares? If it gets, if it drops a word in the middle of a legal contract that later becomes, material to a big case, you care. And so how do you deal with that?
So the real discussion there is specialism versus generalism, right? And most of the time when people are talking about AI tools, they're generally thinking in the back of their mind something like a ChatGPT interface or whatever it may be. But the range, variety, and essentially complexity of different AI tools is vast. And something like Luminance, that's exactly our pitch, right? So we've been around for a long time. The idea is, how do you provide more trust, more capacity for reliance than a standard tool, a generalist tool that's available to anyone in the world? So we've taken two approaches. One is qualifying data. You talked about, the amalgamation and homogenization of data there, which is bringing a big pool together. Okay, but what's good in that pool, right? The answer isn't as simple as that. As if we have everything, we'll be able to distill that into a useful form. So the approach we have is what we call panel of judges, which is where we use various AI systems who are ranked for different tasks to essentially come to a consensus. And one thing actually AI tools are very good at, even when there is hallucination, is checking each other's work. They're very good at being critical of each other. So if you ask ChatGPT to be critical of itself, it's terrible. If you ask ChatGPT to be critical of Anthropic or Gemini or any of these others, they're much better. And that cross-reference us. Now, we do a much more complicated version of that at a individual word, individual sentence, whole document level, in order to provide correct analysis, correct suggestions. The reality is that the capabilities of those tools are shifting every day. And it's a huge investment, both in terms of legal technologists. We have huge teams of people who are lawyers, ex-lawyers, paralegals, etc., whose whole job is verifying AI outputs and providing human feedback. But also research teams who are constantly testing the actual underlying strengths of the models. When you combine that, you're able to give someone a lot more trust. Now, the reality is, how can you ever be certain? Well, you can't, because you can't even get 5 partners who are specialists in the same subject at the same law firm even to agree on every legal question, every matter of legal interpretation. So there will never be a perfect answer generated by an AI system. The best you can hope for is a factually correct answer that someone who is being reasonably critical will accept as being acceptable. The regulators are quite clear on this as well, which is that the final output is the lawyer's responsibility. It's not the technology's responsibility. OpenAI has actually come out recently and spoken a bit more on this subject specifically, that they shouldn't be relied on as legal advice. I'll be transparent. We have disclaimers all over our product as well, like anyone else sensibly would. What we try and do is enable the greatest level of trust, but also the greatest ease of verification, so that if you are going to make a decision on the basis of what's in your documents, or if another product were to help you make a decision based on a research task, how easily can you verify that and come to your own conclusion? Because you, as the lawyer, is the one who's ultimately responsible for that decision.
So what's the trajectory of this kind of business, right? I mean, you're providing certain services now, but one can easily, when you think about AI, say, well, in the future, I think AI could handle research functions. I think AI could handle drafting and composition functions. I think AI could handle negotiation strategy and negotiation assistance functions. I think AI could handle different stages of the trial process to the appeal, so it gets built around different kinds of things. Or it can handle monitoring, in a way that people can't. Here's a deal. Are they out living up to the deal? How's that going? I mean, that's me. I'm not a professional. Tell me, what of that is reality, and what are the things that your clients are saying, we want this next, or we can't wait for this to be a possibility?
Sure. Actually, I think all of what you said is realistic. It's not all within Luminance's intentions because we focus anything relating and touching contracting. We try and stay out of lots of litigation considerations. But all of the above are things that clients are interested in. Research is one. We may look at that. For now, that's not the highest priority. There's a lot of players out there trying to do that kind of thing in a dependable manner. The basis is Luminance was one of the first agent platforms. We have a multi-agentic system allowing continuous workflows without human interaction. So I think where we'll actually get to with contracts is AI versus AI for things that no human wants to look at. So if my company standards are X, your company standards are Y, you send your two robots out to essentially negotiate and find the middle ground. You both know you will, because it's not that important. It's a low-value document. Great. It's agreed. It gets sent to a human being for signature. I think that is something we'll definitely see. We'll also see more cross-departmental collaboration. So at the moment, we've spoken a lot about legal, but contracts touch so many parts of a business. You've got finance, you've got procurement. You just mentioned about whether someone's done a task, an obligation under a contract. Great. Well, a simple example is if you've got a contract and you've got an invoice and it comes to the finance team and they have an automated system which not only tells them if the contract has been signed, but the system is live, and then that connects to whether they can pay the invoice or whether the vendor can issue the invoice. Connecting the dots along the commercial relationship using AI systems is an incredible opportunity, where at the moment, most of these processes are, a finance person emailing their legal team. Hey, did the contract sign? When do we need to issue the invoice? Or you relying on some kind of a contract management system like a Salesforce, and then having to manually change fields. These things are very, very clunky and are increasingly being augmented using AI. And I think where we'll see is much more joined up thinking within businesses. And that is kind of what, especially our large enterprise customers, which is the majority of our businesses, people like AMD, Coke Industries, those kinds of customers, these very large conglomerates, they want joined up thinking across large organizations, because siloing is where mistakes happen and also where wasted resource happens.